Everybody is talking about OpenGate video, even though it's not a new tool. It's been around for a very long time, and it used to be called OpenMat. So essentially what OpenGate is the ability to use your full digital sensor, the width and height, and OpenMat was essentially the same thing, allowing the full use of the film exposure area. And a quick search here on YouTube, you can see a lot of people are scanning older films, which shows a lot of more information on the top and bottom of the screen. And I find these videos to be super fascinating and educational, and you get to see a lot of the work behind the scenes. For instance, some of these OpenMat scans, you'll see the images still cropped, and that's because these were probably visual effects shots that the visual effects artist doesn't need to render the full width of the OpenMat, so they crop it just for what was later going to be intended for. And sometimes in these scans, you'll even see some boom mics that appear in the shot, and I think that's because for those films, the filmmaker might not have intended to go back and reframe the shot. But for the films that did intend to go back and reframe, they were able to deliver in the wider 1:8:5 theatrical aspect ratio, and then later the 4:3 aspect ratio for home video release, which is super similar to what we're doing today in delivering content, whether it be for YouTube, which is more of a 16:9 aspect ratio, or for social media, which is the 9:16. But what would happen to films back then that did not utilize OpenMat? Well, they were subjugated to something called pan and scan, which was a terrible revisionist way to reframe the shot, sometimes without the filmmakers even being present in this reframing of their shots. Essentially, what they were doing was cropping in on the already cropped image and then like panning around to have it fit the more boxy 4:3 aspect ratio. But for the films that were able to utilize this technology, it was super helpful. And did you know one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, Stanley Kubrick, shot OpenGate? The Shining, Full Metal Jacket, and Eyes Wide Shut all utilized OpenMat. And this whole topic of Kubrick and aspect ratios is a very deep rabbit hole online, but basically Kubrick was anticipating the home video release of his films and TV broadcast. And if you know anything about Stanley Kubrick, even on the surface level, you might know that he was very famous for his symmetrically framed shots. So it's very interesting to know that with each of these movies, he was having this dual framing in mind for very wide theatrical distribution and also the 4:3 boxy format. And I think that boxy format suits his style more than the more wider aspect ratio. And I've even read online that some people even prefer the 4:3 aspect ratio of Eyes Wide Shut to the 16:9 version. Why doesn't my camera shoot OpenGate? The camera had everything I needed, but it doesn't shoot OpenGate.
It's overrated.
And just for coolness sake, if you shoot an OpenGate, you'll also be able to say what Kubrick said on the set of The Shining.
Check the gate, Doug.
So as you can see, it was useful even for one of our great filmmakers. Now, what annoys me a lot about this discussion that I read online about OpenGate and the ability for some cameras to shoot OpenGate or not, is that some people just kind of say, oh, I don't need it, or it's overrated. And it's like, why would you ask for less, especially when you know that some other people can find it useful, or also now that it has such a long, useful history cinematically?
When people say, I don't need OpenGate, I just don't need it.
If you have it as an option, it can be useful later on if you have to format it again for different deliverables. And it's like, I think what's going on there in those comments is some people feel that they may have invested in a camera that does not have the ability to shoot OpenGate. And I understand that, but you can also hold two thoughts in your head at the same time. Understand that your camera is still useful even though it doesn't shoot OpenGate, and you can have some intentionality and pre-planning if you're going to deliver to different aspect ratios. But you could also have the same thought that having OpenGate as an option in a camera is super cool and useful. Another thing that bothers me is when people say that this tool is just a new buzzword, which I don't agree with at all, because what's essentially happening is that this tool is now being un-OpenGate kept, so everyone has access to it, and people are seeing how useful it actually is. And it's not like it's something that is going to make your films any better, but it's just going to give you more options to hopefully make your films better. And so it's always just more options for filmmakers. Essentially what it boils down to, if you don't shoot an open gate or have some pre-planning to anticipate some cropping later, you are vulnerable to open fate. Is that good, or is that's really corny? This tool is becoming so ubiquitous, and you can now shoot open gate on your iPhone. And I made a whole video about different ways to unlock this super cool tool.